much Kinyarwanda have you picked if you're not from Rwanda? Huh? Muraho. If Sophia can speak Kinyarwanda. Huh? All right, my name is Eugene Anangwe, and I'm going to be your moderator for this session. The day seemingly started on a lull. I don't know. The marathon last night was draining, eh? Or people are saving their energy for the concert tonight. I don't know. But whatever it is, I know we're going to have a great session on accelerating digital transformation. And this is a very important conversation that we need to be having now. This is actually a session that is going to help us introduce the World Bank's digital transformation agenda for Africa. It will also lay out how an ecosystem approach will actually lead to a transformative impact, and it will also discuss the operationalization of the initiative through replicable solutions in fintech, digital government, digital platforms, entrepreneurship, and of course, digital skills. It's going to be an interactive session. So we will have our panelists here talking to us about their views on this topic, but we'll also open the floor for you to be able to share your thoughts on this. Now, if we are ready, then I will be able to introduce Butenia Goremazi, who's actually Director of Digital Development at the World Bank. She's going to set the tone for us with a keynote address or a presentation, and then we'll pick up from there. Let's give her a round of applause as she comes to talk to us.
Can I have the mic instead? Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to contribute these brief remarks to the session on accelerating digital transformation in Africa. This is a key priority for the World Bank, one that is closely linked to how we define development in the 21st century, and a key ingredient to reach our twin goals of reducing extreme poverty and contributing to shared prosperity. We heard it very clearly and loudly over the past 2 days. Africa is at the verge of becoming a fully digitally enabled continent. Digital interventions have been a force for positive change and opportunity on the African continent for years. Carefully matured by its leaders, this process has reached a stage where a big step forward is possible. Comparable to what we've seen in the mobile revolution in the 1990s, or maybe even more. We are excited about the enthusiasm and the energy Africa is showing on the digital agenda. Many have asked me, why is the bank so interested about this agenda? Why does it matter? And why now? The simple answer to this question is that business as usual is no longer an option. The scale of the current and past support is nowhere near the scale of the challenges, the opportunities, and the ambition of our clients. As we live in a world that becomes hyper-connected, in a world that everything is connected to everything, in a world where intelligence is very important and data is the fuel of the economy. Countries that do not have what it takes to hook up to this age will be left behind. So this is very important as we think about how we work with our governments to take advantage of the digital transformation. What we've been doing in the bank, working closely with the African Union, working closely with the leaders of the continent, is how do we get the continent to take advantage of this development by doing business in a different way? So the Moonshot Initiative, or the Digital Transformation Initiative, you've heard a lot about it in the past few days, is basically an initiative that calls that we do things differently. Differently, one, by thinking in an ecosystem approach, looking at demand and supply at the same time. It is not sufficient to lay the cables and lay the infrastructure if we don't have the content that goes into those superhighways. So the importance of an ecosystem approach. The second one is the importance to think deeply about transformation. Digital technology is not an end in itself. It's something that will help transform every sector of the technology. So the notion of transformation is very important. The moonshot approach is also an approach that is homegrown. Look at the innovation that is already happening in Africa. Africa is providing great lessons to the rest of the world in many things. Mobile payment is one of them. There is innovation in the continent. How do we learn from the success story in many areas, and how do we replicate it? How do we move beyond islands of success, beyond pilots, to something that is more mainstream? So the ecosystem approach is very important, and basically the way that we think about it is we think about 5 key foundational elements, and we think these foundational elements need to talk to each other. It's not sufficient to think about each one of them in a separate, isolated way. The first foundational element is digital infrastructure. I want to call it the mother of all foundation, or the backbone of digital economy. Whatever we do in the digital age, if we don't have the infrastructure that is available, affordable, safe, then we will not be able to do any transformation. Digital infrastructure is very important. Today in Africa, there are still many people who are not connected. And those who are connected have to pay very, very high amount to participate. You know, the luxury that many of us feel on the always-on connectivity, unfortunately, still doesn't exist in many countries in Africa, including my own. So I'm from Tunisia. You know, when I go there on vacation, I have to, think twice or double check if the modem is switched off before I go to bed at night, because the luxury of the always-on still doesn't exist. In a digital economy, that cannot be afforded. So digital infrastructure is very important. The way we look at it in the bank is we look at both the hard infrastructure and the soft infrastructure. What is preventing many countries in Africa today to have full broadband connectivity? Is it an investment failure? Is it a policy failure? Is it a regulatory failure? So the approach of the moonshot is to look at the whole elements of the internet value chain. For each one of them, we look deeply into what is needed in terms of investment, what is needed in terms of policy and regulatory reform to get the countries connected at speeds that are good and at costs that, do not let people thinking twice whether to use the internet or not. And there is a lot of work that we're doing with the Broadband Commission, with ITU, with a number of partners with whom we work very closely to see how to bridge this connectivity gap and how do we get the infrastructure in place to enable the digital economy. But infrastructure alone is not sufficient. In many cases, people have access, they don't use it. So we need to ask the question about adoption. Why do people not use the internet? Is it a matter of skills? Is it a matter of lack of content that is relevant? So the approach of the moonshot is to look at these elements only. As I mentioned earlier, if you have the connectivity and you don't have the content that goes with it, it's like having highways without cars. Who wants this? No one. So in addition to the digital infrastructure, we're looking also at digital platforms. And the way we think about digital platforms, both public and private platforms. We talk a lot about ID as a great enabler to help the digital economy, as most of our life now is migrating to become digital. If people do not have a digital ID, they don't exist in this online world. And there is still a lot of work that is needed to make sure that everybody has a digital ID. I believe there was a session in this same room before on this particular topic. We need to have digital financial inclusion. When we talk about the economy, we talk about buying and selling. in a digital world, this needs to happen using digital means. So digital financial inclusion is very important, and it's a foundation of the digital economy framework that we're thinking about. Content is definitely driven by entrepreneurship, by ideas, by good ideas. How do we get a vibrant entrepreneurship ecosystem, and how do we work together with the entrepreneurs to make sure that their ideas do not die immediately after, you know, getting a reward for a good idea. So this is very important in the moonshot, to create this ecosystem of digital entrepreneurship. And skills are very important, so that would be the last element of the moonshot framework. When we talk about skills, it's both the skills to use the internet, but we're also interested about the skills to create the content. I think the main idea and the ambition that we heard over the last few days is that, you know, Africa should not stay at the receiving end of the technology. We need to make sure that there is sufficient skills to create the application of the future, to be part of, you know, the fourth industrial revolution, not just as a consumer of technology, but also as, you know, a creator of this technology. These foundational elements will not work if they don't work together. So that's, you know, the core of the element of the moonshot framework. But they do not work if we don't have a number of cross-cutting priorities that need to be there at the same time. Policy and regulation is very important, and they apply to each pillar of the moonshot pillars. Data, you know, the past few days we're talking about data and the importance of data. It is indeed the fuel of the economy. The data that we use today was created, all the data that is used today was created only 2 years ago. As we move to a place where everything is connected to everything, with, you know, IoT and 5G and all the possibilities, the amount of data that will be available is incredible. So do we have the right policy and regulatory environment to use this data well, to protect this data? The whole data question is a cross-cutting element under the moonshot approach that really is very important. The other element that is very important for the moonshot framework is how do we ensure that, as we are very excited about digital economy and digital technology, that countries have in place the elements, the policy and the skills to take care of any risks associated with technology. This is very important because, you know, we have to face it. Technology is very important, but there are risks linked to cybersecurity. There are links to how do we make sure that, you know, the kids are safe and protected when they use the internet. The whole discussion about those risks should be a core element in policies and strategies where government think about digital economy. There is also the risks of exclusion. You know, today, when we don't have connectivity, people without connectivity will be falling into the digital trap of digital poor. And it's a very difficult trap to get into, and a very difficult trap, very easy to get into and very difficult to get out of, because those who are connected faster with smarter, you know, devices, and the rate of catching up is more difficult. So managing the risk of exclusion is a core element of how we think about digital development. The other element of cross-cutting of this moonshot approach is also gender. How do we make sure that when we look at digital economy, we think very deliberately about making sure that women are brought online, they have the skills, and they are key participant in the digital economy. The foundations of the digital economy are very important. The most important thing is how these different foundations can translate in use cases in every sector of the economy. So with a good foundation, we get to a space where the governments are smarter through GovTech initiatives. We get to a space where, you know, e-services is easier, e-commerce is easier, digital health is a possibility, digital agriculture is a possibility. So the digital economy for us is really an economy where digital, you know, touches every sector. So this is in a nutshell, you know, the way we think about the Moonshot initiative, being holistic, The other very important point is the level of ambition. We would like to work closely with the continent, with the AU, with the governments, with the representative of the region to make sure that we reach a target of every person, every individual, every government, and every enterprise is digitally enabled by 2030. Some people say this is very ambitious, but we think that it's possible if we have the right policies, the right regulations, the mindset. I think it can happen. Today, as part of participating in Transform Africa, the bank delegation is a very big one, it's a very large one. And this is the first time that we come this numerous to Transform Africa, because it reflects also the importance to work beyond the silo approach. The digital economy agenda is a whole of government agenda. We're trying in the bank also to think about it as a whole bank agenda. This is where we're working very closely with colleagues from finance, competitiveness and innovation, colleagues from governance, colleagues from education. Every sector of the bank is key to make sure that the enabling environment is there to enable the digital economy. And we're working very closely with governments to make sure that the same approach is also replicated at the national level. This agenda requires very close collaboration between every ministry in government. And how do we get to a space where everyone is working with everyone is very important to reach the goals of the digital economy for the continent. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. We can afford some hearty round of applause. More, come on. I mean, this is the World Bank. If you don't give proper, I didn't say anything. Right, so I want us to get into this next phase, which is very interesting. And I want us to be ready for this conversation because it's going to open up so much as far as this discussion is concerned. So allow me to introduce our panelists who are going to join us here on set. You will take the seats according to how I will call your name. So starting us off is none other than Patrick Nyirishema, who's the Director General of Rwanda Utilities Regulatory Authority, RURA. A round of applause for Patrick. Next up is Dr. Bienvenu Soglo, who's the Government and Policy Director, Africa at Intel. A round of applause for him. Ladies and gentlemen, let's also welcome on set Deborah Wetzel, who's the Regional Integration Director for Africa from the World Bank. A round of applause. Joining us also is Goodluck Akinwale, who's the Head of Sub-Saharan Africa, GSMA. A round of applause for him. And lastly, Philbert Nsengimana, Founder and CEO, IDEX, and he's also the Chair, Alliance for Affordable Internet. A round of applause for Jean Philbert. Right, so we are going to have a conversation that we will open up for the rest of the members on the floor to be able to join us on. Kindly, you will switch on the mic if I throw a question at you, and then you'll be able to respond. Now, I'll allow us to start off with Deborah, because Deborah, I'd like to understand, first of all, this is a great initiative, of course, and from the name Moonshot, we are asking ourselves, are you trying to do what we always hear people say, aim at the moon, you may land on the stars? How far are you ready to go with this initiative? What sort of anticipation are you seeing from the World Bank where you sit, and expectations as far as intake is concerned, or uptake?
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. I think for the World Bank, the Africa Moonshot is an integral project, very ambitious. We are aiming for the moon and the stars. And the question is, why do we aim that way? We think that this is a moment that's a transformative moment, and if we lose this moment, our efforts to support the continent of Africa in terms of improving its economic activity, improving the potential for jobs, is an opportunity that can be quickly lost. And so, as Butenya indicated, we've mobilized across the entire institution to think about how can we support the continent of Africa, transform Africa, smart Africa, the countries themselves. And in my capacity as Director for Regional Integration, we're trying something a little new, which is we're moving a little bit beyond the country-based model to say how can we work across countries? Because very many countries are focused on this. But then one of the issues that we have heard a lot about in the discussions over the past 2 days is the issue of how do we get coherent and consistent policies and regulations either in subregions of Africa or across the continent as a whole to be able to help everybody to step up to achieve the goals that they would like to achieve. And that's a huge coordination issue, and it's something where the World Bank can play a role given its convening power, given the experience we have, and the very deep relationships, deep and long-term relationships that we have with both governments and the IFC relationships with the private sector around the world to address that broad range of pillars that Butenya discussed.
Right, thank you. Let me come closer to Rwanda here, and I want to talk to Patrick. Patrick, we are talking about accelerating digital transformation, but we cannot talk about acceleration without knowing where we are, without knowing accelerating from what to which particular level. From where you sit as a regulator, if you look back, let's say 2-3 years ago, what sort of level of acceleration has happened from a Rwanda perspective and from a regulator perspective that probably the rest of the audience here would be able to say, wow, okay, we can pick a few things here and there from Rwanda?
Thank you very much. Indeed, to accelerate, you need to be moving. You don't accelerate if you're stationary. So there has to be forward movement. I think over the last 2 to 3 years, several things have happened. One, in terms of if I start with the issue of digital infrastructure, which was highlighted in the keynote as we're opening, over the last 2 to 3 years, we have seen a significant investment into the infrastructure to deliver connectivity and coverage countrywide in terms of 4G and 3G, at least bringing access, data access, not access, coverage to more than 90% of the population. We've seen progress in access, not as fast as we wanted, because access means primarily 2 things. Once you have coverage, you also need access devices, you also need affordability. On affordability, we've seen tremendous progress. Today, you can get a bundle, I mean, you live here in Rwanda, you can get a bundle for maybe 12, an equivalent of $12 that gives you data for a whole month. I think in terms of affordability, we've also made tremendous progress. Prices come down more than 50% over the last 2 to 3 years. Where we still have a gap is on access devices.
Yeah, but Patrick, sorry to cut you short, but
yeah,
affordability for some people would say is relative. What is affordable to you may not be affordable.
Relative.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how do you respond to those who probably still feel the cost of, connectivity is still high? I know you are the regulator, you're not the one who's actually supplying this and all that, but you regulate the cost, you regulate the prices. What can be done to accelerate or to increase the level of affordability? I know Phil Berry is here. Talk to us a bit about what the Alliance is doing as far as cost is concerned, but from where you sit, what would you be able to share?
I would say 2 things. Number one, you asked me the progress, so I was sharing the progress. Anytime you have something improving by more than 50%, I think that's progress. And the trend continues. From a regulatory standpoint, what is key is to create conditions that the market functions, that you have proper competition on the market. And I think we've been able to do that. I don't want to take so much time, but if I go back 3 years ago, we had a market setup that, yes, we're seeing progress on the pricing, but wasn't very healthy. Now we have a very healthy functioning industry. Companies are able to make a return on their investment, but at the same time, services are becoming more and more affordable, and they're also investing. So I think it's significant progress. Now, affordability is relative to the means of the person that you're looking at. When I look at the continental level, for the last 3 years, I think we've consistently been among the top 4 most affordable services of internet in Africa by different rankings. So I would say there's good progress. Now, Is it affordable to every single person? Maybe not, but that applies to every other service.
All
Not
right.
just the internet.
Thank you. Allow me to check if we have Franch Makoska from Microsoft, and I'm going to be displaced. So I'm hoping he's going to moderate the panel better than me. All right, but he's just coming in to join the panel, so I will be roving around so that he's able to share with us the Microsoft perspective on this. Let me just bring Bienvenue on this conversation, because Bienvenue, we've heard from the World Bank, you know, that there's this initiative that is not just targeting at the moon, but also the stars. From where you come from, how do you plug into such initiatives? Yesterday we had a session here on the issue of creating the smart cities. And what we were told is that citizen involvement is very key in such initiatives for them to succeed, for them to prosper. How do you plug into this kind of initiatives coming in from, you know, supporting organizations like the World Bank?
Thank you very much, moderator. And thank you for the audience for tuning into this session. To actually participate in this conversation, Intel has recently published a white paper on 5G policy implication in sub-Saharan Africa. This is a very hot topic, right, as we're looking at 5G as the foundation of the fourth industrial revolution. The angle we took in the white paper is say, look, there are opportunities here. For example, we have a study from Ericsson which projected that by 2026, the economic potential of 5G in Africa is in the order of 10.5 billion in different sectors like transport, healthcare, etc. You also have a report from the GSMA published recently in December 2018, which projected that by 2034, the GDP impact of the 5G millimeter wave will be in the order of 5.2 billion in sub-Saharan Africa. There are also studies in terms of the economic impact from Wi-Fi, which says in 2018, its global impact, let's say in the digital economy, is in the order of 2 trillion, right? So there is potential. Now, when we look at the broadband penetration in Africa compared to the world average, the broadband penetration in Africa is around 43.5% compared to 70% of the average worldwide. So there's an opportunity, and we believe that 5G can actually help improve the broadband penetration for that. So in the white paper, what we look at, we believe that first there's a need to have a transformation, obviously, of some of the infrastructure which are there. And for that to happen, or at the same time, we need some regulatory kind of effort that need to take place. As we're talking about, you know, this initiative from the continental perspective, we believe that there is a need to develop a continental digital strategy, right, whereby you have a harmonized regulation that can facilitate this kind of effort. And the second element I would like to add to that, we believe that there's a need to develop a 5G action plan whereby you have different type of roadmaps or studies. For example, in the 5G action plan, you could have a spectrum roadmap, for example. You could have a strategy that you develop to facilitate the deployment of infrastructure, such as a fiber, which are currently on the way, infrastructure such as data centers or cloud. And to the point, which is very important, is about the content. So what are the relevant use cases for the continent, right? And part of that use case is the digital government that we've been talking about today.
Right. Of course, very interesting. But of course, maybe coming in from the perspective of Honorable Philbert, I mean, I'm sure that at the end of the day, we've had the concern that some people say, you know, affordability is still not something that is reachable for some people when it comes to internet, but also priorities. Yesterday, I was looking at a post on a tweet that was made of a statement that President Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya mentioned, that in the next 5 years, the whole country would be connected to the internet. But when I was reading the comments below that particular post, I would see people saying that these are not our priorities. We still do not have water in some areas of our country. We do not have schools and all that. So how then do we talk to this kind of people with such a mindset that, connectivity is also key, and it's also something that you should not look at as a luxury from where you sit, Philbert?
Thank you. On the issue of affordability, let me come with a measure that has been proposed by the Alliance of Affordable Internet. This is an area we need to keep making progress. Initially, the Broadband Commission for Digital and Sustainable Development had proposed a measure of not having 1 gigabyte that is priced at more than 5% of their GDP per capita, your monthly revenue, basically. But of recent, the Alliance for Affordable Internet has been advocating, and the Broadband Commission has endorsed a target of lowering that to 2%, because think about 5%, it's a lot of money. And when you put it into a context like Rwanda, let's say the average income is $2 per day, $60, anywhere between $75 and $60 per month, and you look at what is 2%. 2% will be something around $1.5. Do you have bundles that give you 1 gigabyte of data at around $1.5? In Rwanda, yes, you do. We've been monitoring, but in so many countries in Africa, you don't. So internet remains largely unaffordable to many Africans. And Patrick talked about the issue of devices. I think we're not putting enough emphasis on that. And if we believe what the World Bank tells us in terms of the impact of increase of broadband penetration to GDP, I think it will be very good business to make sure that everyone is connected. Even those who cannot afford by themselves, there should be plans, aggressive programs by public administrations in collaboration with the private sector to make sure that everyone is connected. Because the cost of connecting them compared to the impact it will generate on the country's GDP. I've been doing my math. I can tell you, if we connect everyone, the benefit is at least 5 times higher. So the question comes back to what the president said yesterday, President Kagame, when asked about what are the top 3 things that he believes would be a game changer. The first thing he said, it's maybe counterintuitive to many people, but the way I interpreted it is, do we actually believe in this agenda? Do we believe in the power of technology to change lives?
Do you personally believe?
I personally believe, but if we collectively believe that, and we put our hands where our mouth is, we would make sure, first thing, that we unite, so we broaden our market. Yeah. Secondly, we connect everyone, and everything else will fall in place.
Right. Good luck. I mean, Philbert says we probably are not putting money where, they say mouth where the money is, or money where the mouth is. Do you personally believe in this agenda? Because coming from GSMA, I mean, I want to understand how you see this as a significant enabler to achieving every other thing that the communities really need. Because if we really believe, picking from Philbert's words, then we would all be running to actually ensure that everybody is connected. And his concern is that we seemingly are not believing in this. We seemingly are not moving at the pace that we need to be moving. What's your take on this? Good luck.
Thank you very much. I have a slightly different perspective from Jean Philbert. If you look at the critical success factors that influenced the take-up of mobile phones between 1999 to date, what were those factors? A lot of things were said in 1999 and in 2000 that are the same things being said about the adoption of broadband today. I think that the issues are probably less affordability, but more of priority. In a couple of months, we will be celebrating Eid all over the world. My uncle in the village is going to spend $200 on a ram. His income is in the range of the numbers that Jean Philbert mentioned. So I think a lot of the time, it's a question of priority. When mobile networks started in sub-Saharan Africa, 1999, 2000, 2001, people said those tariffs were unimaginable. People did not have those sort of buying power, and that you would never grow the numbers that would make a sustainable business. Fast forward 10 years later, completely the opposite. People have a lot of money under their beds, wherever, but they saw the value in being able to talk, in people being able to reach them, in being connected to the world, and they invested in handsets and all those things. So I believe that if the content is right, the relevance is right, we will see greater broadband adoption. People will spend that money ultimately. So, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done. We've said a lot of things. Yesterday, it was nice to hear President Kagame say that, look, the people who will fix this thing are in this hall. I would have added that the people who are also stopping it are also in this hall. You know,
That would have made it more than the 10 words that he was asked for. Deborah, you want to join in on this?
Yes,
Let me hear what your thoughts
to
are.
come in because we spent a lot of time over the past couple days talking about the hardware of connectivity and the fiber and how to lay all that down, or satellites or other mechanics of it. I'd like to talk a little bit about a different type of connectivity, which was how people connect with each other. So you mentioned this question of how services are delivered or not. And what we're talking about is a total transformation between the relationship of citizens with their government, and how to level that a bit, make it a bit more horizontal, and a bit more about how government creates an environment that is interoperable within government, but also provides more effectively the services that people need and provides them in real time. Not waiting for people to show up and fill out forms and wait in lines, but to make government more accessible. Same with businesses, creating the platforms and the environments to generate the entrepreneurial activity that can help economies grow, that can help individuals find new ways of doing things. So the pricing is important, the policies are important, but it's not only about connectivity of hardware, it's about how we each connect to each other and create a new dynamic going forward.
Right. We haven't heard from French from Microsoft, and every day on a day-to-day basis we interact with your products. And of course, I would like to read your mind on what you think are the biggest misconceptions when it comes to this whole conversation on accelerating digital transformation. What are those things that you feel, you guys are just talking, and I think you're getting it all wrong, and we need to think it this other way?
First of all, apologies for taking your chair. Thank you. So what are the things that we think? Okay, that's a very difficult question. So I think one of the things that we're getting wrong or not focusing enough on is financing. And this is financing for African companies. So I've been investing in African companies for the last 7 years. And access to capital is really hard, especially at the level that they need. If you want 10 million or 100 million, honestly, it's pretty easy. If you want 1 million, it's very, very hard, because the amount of due diligence that's needed by the investor to do that investment, it costs more than the million. So you go, that's a big area that we've been focusing on, trying to enable our partners and our partner ecosystem with affordable financing. But we take an ecosystem approach across Africa in our investments and the different things that we're doing, and we're very much aligned with the moonshot in terms of skills, infrastructure, affordability, and connectivity. So I'll just comment on the affordability piece. Yeah, it's there's different numbers. The real point is we're not there yet, and once it's affordable, it needs to be adoptable and properly used. And that's about skills and content and a lot of other things. So Microsoft's making very large investments around that. We just announced yesterday a $100 million investment in Nairobi and Lagos on the development center for Africa, for African technology to go to the world.
But even as we talk about the issue of, access and even these deals that are being signed, and of course talking about Africa as a continent when it comes to innovation, the key challenges also faced by innovators is the issue of protection of their IP. And it's a real concern for young innovators who feel worried that probably this innovation I'm coming up with is not going to be, protected. It's not going to stay mine for long. So, from a Microsoft perspective, what are you doing so that, because without the innovators, then this digital transformation might not even work because they're part of the ecosystem?
No, you're absolutely right. And actually, to that end, we opened an IP center with Strathmore University in Kenya, and we're trying to replicate that across multiple countries. For that very reason, is to accelerate and to make IP registration easy in the country, so that it can be protected and enforced, so that people can feel that when they invent something, they can be protected, and that they can get the proper protection from the legal framework within that country.
Right.
So yeah, it's a very, very important point.
Right. Patrick, talk to me a bit about the issue of creating digital champions. Because if we exhaust the existing ones, then we are not able to think about how we will sustain the future as far as digital innovation and digital transformation in the end is concerned. From where you sit as a regulator, what sort of deliberate regulatory framework is available to enhance and also develop and encourage even more digital champions?
Thank you very much. As my colleague said earlier, I think we dwell too much on the hard infrastructure, but really that's on the foundation. The thing that will accelerate the transformation we desire once we have the hard infrastructure and the affordability and all these things is being able to create an innovation ecosystem where digital champions, as you speak, have a playing field to play, where they can innovate, they can build applications, they can source financing, and that these products can be able to make their way onto the market, and they succeed. Once you have some succeeding, it encourages other people to take the same path. Now, not everybody will succeed. But I think from a policy and regulatory standpoint, the most important thing is to, number one, make sure that you deliberately, through policy, create a large pool of skills in the country. I think in the area of skills, it's not something that the government should leave completely to private people. I think the government has a big role to play there. And I think by creating a critical mass of skills, some of these are going to end up being innovators. And when they innovate, then you look at the market conditions, whether within the country, but also in the broader regional context. And that's why, for example, the heads of state have subscribed in the various countries into the free continental trade area. So hopefully when we talk about accessing the market, it's not just individual countries, but the broader African market, that will break barriers, as President Uhuru Kenyatta said yesterday, and that we are creating opportunities for the young and vibrant population in Africa. So how do you create more champions? I think by ensuring that those who go first are actually succeeding, because then it shows those who are falling behind that this is something I want to pursue. I want to be like so-and-so. They get to see role models, people who have succeeded. And so the ecosystem continues to sustain itself in that way.
Bienvenue. The challenge most innovators have always had is that their innovations sometimes don't make it past the laboratory, prototype level. And Patrick says if we want to encourage others, is ensuring the first ones who went fast are succeeding. From where you sit, do you think that is what is happening today?
Thank you very much, moderator. Well, I think, as he said, you need to put in place an environment that, spurs, encourage the youth to innovate, but also at the same time to help protect, their innovation. So we talk about the IPs, for example. We talk about having successful, let's say, startups, for example. Those will be kind of, role model for those who are actually thinking of working in that space. But obviously also, you need also investments, you need skills. So it's a kind of a broader way of looking at how the whole ecosystem will be put in place. And I think that the policy and the regulatory framework actually comes in and need to be modernized as we talking about digitalized government, because when you look at ICT policies or broadband policies or digital economy strategies of many of the sub-Saharan African countries, they have been developed, a couple of years ago, right? Maybe 4, maybe 5, maybe 6 years ago. So it's time now for regulators to look at some of the regulations which have actually outlived, right, or have served the purpose, and then put in place some regulation which will facilitate innovation, which will facilitate the adoption of new technologies, which will facilitate the development of new skills for innovators.
Right. Thank you. So I want us to open the floor now so that there is participation in terms of the question, concern, comment that you may be having on this particular conversation. So you'll raise your hand up. I'll give you the microphone. You'll introduce yourself and point a question to either specific panelists, or you could ask a general question for any of them to take up. The floor is yours. Yes, we have a hand there.
Thank you. I'm Daniel Homorodean, Vice President of Cluj IT Cluster, Romania. I want to ask the panel, and in particular the representatives of the World Bank and Mr. Nireshima, what do they think about the role or the potential of the smart specialization in the regional and country context as fosterer of the development of the economy, and especially of the digital economy in Africa. And I was hearing with great and good surprise that, for example, Togo is going to be specialized in blockchain. And we're seeing this in Europe, in various places, like, for example, Luxembourg is specialized strategically at the government level in investing and fostering the development of fintech and satellite technology. And we're seeing regions in Europe specializing at the level of the regional administration and of the industry in other directions, aerospace or automotive and so on. I wonder, so if there is such perspective in Africa, and if you find it relevant. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You could take that, Deborah. Yeah.
So let me start with that. I think what we are seeing around the world and what we've heard about during the past few days here is that there are all sorts of different types of technologies that come into play. So we just had a session with the private sector earlier this morning, and there was a large question about, is it fiber that we need to lay down? Is it satellites that we need to use? Is it the free optics that are now coming into play with the use of lasers for passing information? And I think, so what's important from a policy perspective is for us to make sure that the policies are technology neutral, so people can develop and specialize in the way they think is most suited for a particular purpose and for a particular area. And I think as we pass, we'll see different countries, different sectors, different areas, and different subregions perhaps specializing in particular types of activities. But the thing we know and we see around the world is that things are changing pretty rapidly. So as you specialize, you also need to stay in touch and on top of what's happening elsewhere in order to be able to move things forward. So we're learning about different places across Africa that are taking up different issues, thinking about how that specialization also feeds into broader coordination and how each bit that's specialized feeds into the broader ecosystem will be important. At the bank, one of the things that we're doing is we are sponsoring regional centers of excellence to try to help promote particular skills. You can't have a center of excellence in every country for every topic. So how do we make sure we're getting the scale that's required for different types of issues, be it fintech, be it other type of technical skills, be it higher level education? How do we make sure we're getting the balance right between getting the scale of knowledge out there, the scale of skill development that's needed out there without replicating it in every single country? And I think you'll see that in various forums around the world and as technology moves forward.
Right. Any other panelists wants to add a voice on that?
Very briefly, I agree with what Deborah just shared. I think it's difficult for every country to become specialized in everything or become very good in everything. There are some foundational pieces that you need in every country, but in terms of building a vibrant ecosystem and being among the leaders, you have to identify certain clusters, a cluster approach, as a niche area that you develop. In fact, Smart Africa is organized around this concept. So for example, Rwanda is focusing on smart cities within now, smart cities is very broad. You can have almost everything there. Ivory Coast, I think, is cybersecurity and so on and so on. So each country or each head of state picks something where their country wants to become a champion. So I think in terms of economic planning and how we approach technology and building strength in our countries, I completely agree that a country has to identify, and we have done that in Rwanda. We've also identified a few areas, including artificial intelligence, space technology. So we're looking at a few areas where we think they have big potential for us and the continent, and then we're trying to build strength there and work with counterparts across the continent. Thank you.
Right. I see Bienvenue also wants to just real quick.
Yes, thank you, moderator. It's actually on the technology neutrality piece that I think it's very important because you need all type of technologies, right? Whether it's 3G, whether it's 4G, whether it's 5G, whether it's satellite, it depends on where you are and what the use cases are. So I think that's an important piece. The second piece, I think the relevance of the use cases. As I said, Smart Africa, each country the champion a certain use case. But once you have, let's say, a list of relevant use cases for Africa, for example, that would be easier. That you learn from the experience from one country, and then easily you can basically develop an appropriate framework for the country.
Right. All right. Any other question? Oh, there's a hand. Okay, let's give the two ladies first, and then we'll go to the gentleman over there.
Hi, I'm Oyeronke Oyetunde from MTN. This is a question specifically for the regulator in our midst and anyone else. How do you see your role changing with the adoption of a whole new digital economy, digital environment, and so on? This is particularly not just your role, but also what you do. In terms of convergence, in terms of the adoption of the various technologies, how are you going to merge licensed and the unlicensed service providers? Would you still be giving licenses to everybody, or are you still going to restrict it to a few? Or, how are you going to regulate the whole ecosystem? And is it going to involve a totally different paradigm shift in the way you look at the whole ecosystem as a whole? And what do you think you should be doing?
Patrick.
I think this deserves a session of its own, to be quite frank. But I'll make a couple of comments. Number one, we have to be cognizant of the fact that change comes and always comes. We cannot continue to think and act in the way we did several decades ago. So the industry itself evolves. Regulation has to evolve as well. And I think what you're talking about is a scenario where we have, for example, the traditional telecom industry as we know it. And then we have a lot of application providers or platforms that offer a lot of services riding on top of the telecom infrastructure and creating different kinds of value for the subscribers. So then you end up with a situation where you have licensed service providers, infrastructure providers, and you have a lot of unlicensed providers that are riding on this infrastructure. The question that every regulator has is to decide what you regulate and what you don't regulate. That's a very crucial question because you have to avoid over-regulation. At the same time, you also have to try and create conditions that are fair for all the players on the market. That gets a little bit more tricky, of course, depending on what industry you're looking at. And I think number three, there's also a local regional dynamic being at play with the global dynamic. So for example, you have some platform providers that operate across the world. and they're not in any way subject to local regulatory conditions. How long can you maintain this kind of setup is a question, depending on what the service is. I'll speak just for RURA as a regulator. We have now been revising our regulatory framework and licensing framework to provide for what we call application service provider licenses, which we look at in terms of, let's say, platform providers that are, one, handling a lot of personal identifiable information within the country, and there's need for protection for privacy and all these issues. So those kind of, now, we're still streamlining this licensing framework. It's not yet out. I'm just mentioning it because we're quite advanced working on this. And that will help us address some of the gaps that exist, but it's not by any means intended to require a license for everything and everybody, no. So I think the conditions are changing. We need to move to more smarter regulation. At the same time, the players on the market need to evolve their business models to catch up with the changing global dynamic in terms of technology and economics. So you cannot continue to maintain last century business models in this current century. And in fact, I'll be keen to hear, for example, from my colleague from Intel who was talking about 5G as a big thing, and I completely agree. But I'm yet to see real convincing business models around 5G. I've been interacting with a lot of people. There's a lot of excitement about the technology, but as a regulator, I'm actually keen to see real business models and based on real use cases that we can see, other than the fact that you can have higher speed, you can, avail more services and all this. We need to translate that into viable business models. Thank you.
I see he wants to defend his 5G, yeah?
By the way, I'm not questioning 5G. I'm only
it's
saying that the same excitement that
yes.
we have about the technology and what it can do,
Yeah.
I like to see that converted into, real, use cases tied to business models that are going to generate revenue to justify the investment.
Yeah. Let's allow, first of all, there was another question here, and then you can be able to interact on that sense. There's a question from a sister from Kenya.
Hello, everyone. My name is Frida Mwangi, and I'm the founder of the very newly formed Online Professional Workers Association in Kenya. So I think my question maybe would be to the Microsoft and World Bank. What we've done is we are working on the developing digital skills for the young people, but we have realized that most Kenyans or most young people will get those skills, will self-teach or self-train themselves. Secondly, there's a group that is between high school and the university, those that don't get to go to the tertiary schools or the university. There's a group that looks like it's getting lost somewhere, because yes, they have internet. Kenya has done a good job in that, but because the most they can do is peer train or self-train, so they fall under the very low level online jobs, like content writing, virtual assistance and transcription and such. So we have a problem of finding people who can actually train on these new skill sets that are relevant for the future. And my question would be, how is it for the young people to access gurus maybe from Microsoft or IBM and organize something so that we can get relevant skills being taught to the young ones?
Right, you can take it.
Yeah, so no, thank you for the question. It's something that we've been dwelling on, and particularly the youth in Kenya we've been working with. There's a company that we work with called The Well Told Story that publishes Shujaz, which is a comic in Kenya, and it sort of addresses that youth between 16 and 25 who are not in tertiary education, not in formal jobs, and then sort of looking for work. So we're working with them on how to find digital ambassadors, people who have done it, and then film them and do some kind of short video work to give some learnings through a Shujaz digital network. That's an example of what can be done. You have to think at scale, is what I would say. And in this case, it's 7 million kids that we're trying to, address. So if we can crack the scale with the technology is just a utility, the reality is you need people who have done it, who can train others. And then you need to expose them to many, many people. And that's how we're kind of approaching it. We're not sure if we're right, but we think it's a good track. But yes, we have a skills unit, and we can talk.
Bienvenue. Sorry.
Response, we have a category that we call nenes, so not in education and not in employment. And this group you're talking about fits that. Just to complement what Frank has said, I think it is also very important that young people learn not just the technical digital skills. What's really going to be crucial in this world to come is the ability to be flexible and have resilience. And so the critical thinking skills, the creative skills, the sort of collaborative, interactive skills, which are not things that you can necessarily learn sitting in a room on your laptop. How we make sure that young people are also gaining those skills as well. That's part of the basic curriculum that needs to shift, which is something we're working on at the World Bank. But it's not only hardline tech skills, it's these broader skills that are going to help youth be resilient to a world that's going to be very different from that which most of us on the platform have lived in. And so change is going to be a constant.
Good luck. You wanted to add your voice to this.
Yes, please. I think this is one area where we can intervene with the Universal Service Provision Funds. There's a lot of money stuck in U.S. Universal Service Provision Funds across Sub-Saharan Africa.
Yet we're told that young people are needing the money and they don't get the money.
No. I'm not saying you don't give the young people the money.
Yes.
You fund the training, the empowerment, the digital literacy, the life skills that, for me, it's a no-brainer. We can do a lot very quickly. The money is in there. We need a program that puts that money and, develops how that training is done, how it is impacted. You don't have to build new structures. You can leverage on existing structures, but, let's use that money for good. We need to move away from a focus on CapEx. Historically, CapEx was the problem, but I think Butena mentioned this morning, it's no longer necessarily the number one problem.
All right, Phil, I see you also want to join in on this.
I think there has to be a paradigm change in the way we approach the issue of skills development, because when you hear what is said even on this panel, the expectation sounds to be like governments should always be the ones leading education. It has happened, it happens, but the models for educating for the skills of the future, which we even don't know, which are very dynamic in response to market shifts very quickly, the education systems are going to have a hard time to adjust the curricula and so on. So I think we have started seeing models of training and skills development that are privately driven. One company that operates here in Rwanda and in Kenya and Nigeria called Andela, they are actually paying people to learn. Why? Because they believe in the value they are giving you. It's like a money-back guarantee. We train you because we know that the thing we are training you for has demand. And for a certain amount of time, we are going to extract our value back by getting you enrolled on a job. These models can only be fueled by the private sector, and then the public sectors will adjust with time. So I'd like to see that the moonshot pays attention on that private sector driven innovation in skills development, platforms development, sort of start shifting a little bit our understanding from supply. World Bank, traditionally clients are governments, supplying services, supplying connectivity, supplying funding, that supply is very good, but let's also look at the demand side and encourage millions of innovation, things that are happening with the demand side in the market. Let's be good at identifying the good things that are happening in the market and put some resources behind.
Perfect. Let's take one more question, and then we will go for the closing remarks from the panelists.
Good morning. I'm Edouard Clodousou. I'm from Gabon. I'm an entrepreneur. I work in the education sector. I have only a simple question about accelerating digital transformation in education area. So in the past, for example, in my country, governments and some big companies gave a lot of computers in schools and to students. But there is not, there was not the result that we want to see. We wanted to see. So, according to you, what is the best strategy to accelerate digital transformation, particularly in education for children? Thank you.
Right. Who wants to take that? Yeah, go ahead. Good luck.
Yes, thank you very much. I think, again, the problem you've identified is the age-long CapEx problem. Buy the hardware, have a good tape cutting ceremony, and then the place is empty the following day. If you go across sub-Saharan Africa, you would find that governments historically invested in large rooms with plenty computers, internet connection, but once you blocked like the social media sites, some of the more interesting sites, those rooms would be empty. So again, it means that the focus has to change. I always say that the hardware is a problem, but it's not necessarily the only problem. You need to invest in the soft skills, in the awareness, in the digital literacy, into creating a path for relevance, into showing people how you can make money from this, in terms of how this can help your job. That's where the work really needs to be done. I think we have to move away from just buying the laptop and working away.
Right. Deborah, you want to?
Just quickly, so we totally embrace the notion that the private sector can be a leader in educating for the future. So the IFC, actually the International Finance Corp, which is a private sector arm of the World Bank, does put a lot of resources into these new entrepreneurs who are building skills and new types of training. But I think something that is also quite important for thinking about the education process is how we work with and think about teachers. Because teachers are not always in the place they need to be in terms of being able to use technology, to think about technology. And so, as noted a bit earlier, the change that's occurring, this digital transformation, really does create a huge difference for how government provides services, so whether it's public schooling. And so it means we need to rethink teacher training, curriculums, all those type of things, but also totally accept that the private sector can play a bigger role and be a driver in that as well.
Right. If it's very burning, because we had closed for the questions, but let's give you a chance for that. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I have an addition.
What's your name, first of all?
My name is Mizedwa Emmanuel, and I'm coming from Google Digital Skills for Africa. So I get an advice to that question on how we can improve our digital skills educations. And according to that questions, I come with an additions, because we cannot, youths cannot be interested in something running without motivation. There should be something to consider also about motivation, such as providing certificates, as we do in our company like Google Digital Skills. We go there, we train some small businesses about digital marketing, then we provide certificates. If there is some kinds of motivations, the learning process will be easy. Thank you very much.
Wouldn't that be corruption? I'm just asking. What do you think, panelists? I mean, about motivation. If you don't give me motivation, then learning will not be, yes, take it, yes.
Well, I think motivation in the broader sense of I'm doing it for something. Yes. And this could be, he gave an example of a certificate that maybe I show somewhere to prove that I've got this skill. Yes. But I also think we need to look at motivation in a broader sense, that you're tapping into something that people really want to do. And you're giving them the relevant skills that are tied to things they would normally pursue. And within a way, even the mode of delivery should be motivating. It shouldn't be the traditional way of education. I had held back a comment earlier where I was reading about education of the 19th century in the 21st century. and really training people to become much more efficient, turning them into robots while we're trying to get robots to be more intelligent today. So I think we need to completely overhaul the education system, you know, to bring it into the 21st century in the era of AI and all these things that, you know, are driving tremendous changes in all areas of our lives. So I think education is one of the sectors that need to be completely rethought and overhauled, the way we approach it, the way we deliver it, the way we engage these young minds, the young people that are going to be in charge of this future. I think there's a lot of work to be done in that area.
And you've passed this message to the Minister of Education in Rwanda, the overhauling process. You've told him that.
No, we have. we've told him that.
All right. So we're gonna take a round. So you'll be able to add in if there's any other comment you wanted to add. I'll start with Frank. Your takeaway points. Where do we go from here? How do you plug into this World Bank initiative? How do you see it solving the problems that probably we've been having as far as accelerating digital transformation is concerned?
So I've been working in digital transformation for 21 years. So I think the African Moonshot is a great initiative to coalesce around some priorities. And every company has some priorities, and institutions have their own priorities and so forth. I think it's important to make some decisions and get some execution going very quickly. That's my thought. One thing that we are doing in the access area, which I haven't mentioned, which I wanted to talk about a little bit, was around TV white space, where we're doing some interesting work on last mile access. And I think some acceleration in different sectors on different technologies would be very helpful. Africa is proving that some of the technologies born here are going global, like M-Pesa, like, you know, especially in fintech, but also in agriculture. There's some very interesting innovation going on. So what can we take here and go global with, is what I would say.
Thank you. Patrick, you have another chance to tell us what your take home is and probably any other comment you want to say about this program.
First of all, I think the World Bank Moonshot project is very, very welcome. I'll just say a couple of things on that. Number one, we need to be very clear in terms of what role the World Bank is playing, the private sector and the governments, and do it in such a way that whatever is done is going to be sustainable in the long haul. Number two, we need to make sure that we take into consideration context. Context. When you look at the African continent, 54 countries, very diverse, very large, different conditions in all these countries. It's not easy to have a prescriptive thing that you just put on a continent. So we need to go into these countries and try to understand the context and create a structure that makes it effective in the various countries and the various local conditions that exist. Number three, I would say we need to focus on empowering the young people in our countries. Africa is bulging with a lot of youthful people, and in some countries as high as maybe 75% of the people are below the age of 35. So I think we need to be deliberate in terms of leveraging such a large-scale initiative that is bringing together the World Bank, governments, putting together private sector to empower the young people and focus on getting them empowered so they can make a meaningful life for themselves as part of this digital transformation. Thank you.
Thank you. Bienvenue. I see Deborah is taking notes, and if she has to add anything in her notes as far as this initiative is concerned, what would that be as far as your comment is concerned about this initiative?
Thank you very much, moderator. One of the key elements that I think that is going to be a contributor to this initiative is the policy and the regulatory framework. Right, and I think having a continent of around 54 countries, right, there's a need to have some effort, both driven by the government and the private sector and other stakeholders, to work together and develop a continental digital strategy that is going to be used to facilitate, right, digital trades, etc., over the continent. But to the regulator earlier, because he did ask about what are the models about 5G, etc., that we're talking about. From our viewpoint, we believe that even though the standardization process is still ongoing, I mean, whether you look at the ITU, which is going to be by 2020, or if you are looking at the standard organization, such as 3GPP, whereby they already have some network or use cases in place, what I would like to put there is, like, from Intel perspective, we look at 5G as a component of wireless, compute, and the cloud. So there you are talking about the transformation of the whole network, and then you need both licensed and unlicensed spectrum. The reason we say that for 5G, according to a report published by Cisco recently, say when 5G is going to be there, right, like deployed, 71% of the data that are going through the cellular network are going to be offloaded to Wi-Fi, right? So that means that you need to have a holistic view. And to your point, the way that 5G has been standardized, that's what makes us have different type of use cases. Because there we're talking about, you know, a speed of 20 gigabit per second. That can help you solve fixed wireless broadband or last mile, you know, challenges. We're talking about having, you know, million devices per square meters. So you can use that, having a use case such as in agriculture cases, for example. We're talking about having a latency of less than 1 millisecond, or very high reliability. So that can help you have use cases, you know, in healthcare, for example. So I think from Intel, we stand ready to work with stakeholders, you know, in this initiative, including the regulators, to work on developing, you know, some relevant policy and regulatory environment that will help, you know, progress this initiative.
Thank you. Deborah, allow me to skip and go to Goodluck so that Goodluck can also share with us what his thoughts are on what needs to be done. We've had comments from the other speakers. What would be yours, Goodluck?
If you permit me, I'd just like to focus on two things. First of all, it's only in 2018 that we've actually seen Africa achieve more 3G than 2G connections. For the next 3, 4, 5 years, 3G will remain the predominant standard in sub-Saharan Africa. So I am not as bullish as some of my friends and colleagues about the possibilities and opportunities for 5G. I think that we will struggle if we're building an airport in a small village in sub-Saharan Africa and putting handling facilities for an A380. So we've got our work to do. My last point is it's about policy and regulation. And again, I go back to 1999, 2000, when the World Bank went around sub-Saharan Africa almost with a magic bullet of privatization, deregulation, sell off the state incumbent, set up an independent regulator, and conduct open and transparent spectrum auctions. That model worked. And on top of that, what the World Bank also did then was to have its private arm, the IFC, put money into some of these mobile network operators in terms of, like, you know, the first few 5 years, and then the IFC exited. I think that that's the model replicated on the realities that we have now will work. I think that we must, I think it was Dr. Kitsui who said yesterday that we must develop an index. You know, we must have best practices. We must be able to do name and shame. You know, those are the things that will take us from where we are to where we want to get. We must move away from just talking about it and doing the exact opposite. Everybody has recognized M-Pesa as a major success and, you know, what export commodity for us in sub-Saharan Africa. What are we doing? Rather than promoting having M-Pesa or the likes of M-Pesa all over sub-Saharan Africa, we're putting in place now measures that are impeding mobile money networks so that we're going back to people keeping money under their mattresses. So these are the sort of things that, for me, you know, I'm just very passionate about, and I think that our governments and our leaders need to do this right.
Phil, you've been in government and as a minister of ICT yourself, policymakers' perspective, we've had a few concerns that policymakers, regulators have often stood on the path of success of digital transformation, especially when it comes to understanding even these digital, models and all that. What would need to be done to allow, policymakers to actually play a role that is actually encouraging for more transformation to happen from the digital sphere, from where you see it as a person who's been in government yourself?
I thought you were going to give me some time to also make my closing remark without a question. I'll do both. I think on the policy side, what's needed is more ambition. Certainly. These things are possible. It's more collaboration between countries in Africa, but also within the different stakeholders within a particular country. It is flexibility, it was said again yesterday, and I think policymakers and regulators need to embrace change, because change is unstoppable. And policymakers need to keep learning all the time to be able to shape the environment and prepare it for the things they themselves understand and know. So I'll stop there for the policy and regulatory and do my 1 cent on the moonshot. I think one thing that the Moonshot Project has done is to rekindle this interest in the digital economy. All of a sudden, everyone is talking about it. Even the first question you asked me that I did not respond fully on comparing digital with water, with other types of infrastructure, I think the Moonshot has done one thing to elevate the level of priority in terms of investment in digital as well as in those other infrastructures. We shouldn't think about them as competing, but as complementary and all necessary at the same level. So if you have $1, you split it in 3. If you have $3, you put one there. We cannot allow ourselves to think sequentially. Let's resolve this first, and then that first, and then finally we get to digital. So that's one thing. Now, the moonshot to really make sense for the common African, it has to make sense in everyone's life. So from individuals, if there is a legacy that the moonshot should leave is leave everyone connected. Let's close that chapter of connecting people by 2030. If the market doesn't solve it, then the market has failed. Let's come up with unconventional ways. Number 2, businesses, especially the small and medium. Let's make sure that by the time the moonshot closes or sets, every business is just not connected to access internet, but connected to run more effectively, more efficiently, connect to their customers and so on, trade online. Number 3, and finally, governments. By the time this moon has traversed the sky, let every government be connected in delivering digital services to their citizens. There are digital public goods that need to be created everywhere. That don't even crowd out the private sector. But the foundations of a digital economy in terms of platforms and connecting government entities should be there by the time the moonshot ends. And this is a great drawing board. We've been on this drawing board for a few months now. I can't wait to see that we go on the battleground. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Phil. And of course, yeah, you want to clap? I had a clap somewhere. Or okay, yes, just clap. Yeah, for all of them. Yeah, so that Phil doesn't feel. Yeah, Deborah, I'll give you the last word, but not without a question as well. And the question is very simple, and it's all about measuring success. What do you plan, and how do you plan to even measure the success of this particular initiative? As you give us your closing remarks.
Okay, thanks very much. So on the measurement, each of the pillars that Butenya mentioned earlier, so connectivity, skills, platforms, digital payments, and digital entrepreneurship, we have set out very specific targets that we're aiming to achieve. Actually, we should, probably on the World Bank, we can give a website. I don't have all of the targets in my head, but for example, over the next 2 years, we're aiming to double broadband connectivity. By 2030, everyone connected. Each component has a specific target, and so we're monitoring a set of targets. They're high-level targets that bring quite a few other things along with it. They're very ambitious, and the goal is to blast off and to try to bring everyone together with us to help achieve those targets. And just to summarize a little bit what I've taken from colleagues here on the panel and what we think of as the next steps, I think there's 4 key things that we're trying to do. So along with all our colleagues, we're trying to catalyze a discussion. So to make people step up and think differently, a little bit as you were saying, let us step up to this huge challenge, because if we don't step up, we'll be left behind, and we don't want that to happen. Then we need to empower all the different partners, all the players here, whether presidents or citizens or entrepreneurs or public and private sector. How do we bring everybody to the table in a way that empowers them to contribute to the agenda in the way that they can best do so? Third is, how do we harness that energy and take this energy that we have in these various sessions and leave the rooms and the conferences that we're having now and think about what we can each bring to the table to meet those objectives. And then probably most important as a role for Smart Africa, for the bank, for other places, is this question of coordination. So how do we bring the many, many different activities together in a coordinated way so we don't have 1,000, so that we're all rowing in the same direction to achieve the goals. And that's for the public goods that are needed, where the World Bank, traditional World Bank, will play a role in identifying whether that's policy, regulation, some of these different areas we've talked about. Also this question of standards. How do we work across the globe to create a set of standards for countries to step up to and for private sector to step up to? And then how can we bring the private sector? This is not about the public sector, it's just as much about the private sector, because that's where the jobs are, that's where the innovation is, and the interplay between public and private can really make a difference in that. So lots and lots of work for all of us to do, not just the bank with its moonshot. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Lots of work to be done, of course. I agree. But allow me to also just thank our panelists for actually making very great comments over there. A quick reminder, there's a closing ceremony at 3 p.m. At the auditorium. So if you would love to be there, please make sure that you're there. My comment to the organizers and the Moonshot Initiative team, I want what we call a hardship allowance for standing for over an hour. Thank you very much for making time. I want to thank you so much. My name, as always, is Eugene Anangwe. We'll see you again next time. Thank you for your time.